At the galaxy's end where the stars burn wide, are you tuning in, turning on? Is there anybody listening to Earth tonight on the satellite radio?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome. Good to see you, Jeffrey. Welcome to the Studio Q live show. Studio Q show live, however you want to say it. Whenever you're watching this, good to see everybody coming in. Good to see you, George and Will and Linda and Pablo and Steve. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're going to continue on this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're watching this, with our Making Negatives show, right? That's what we do. That's what we've been doing. And we're going to go ahead and continue on with that. So first, I want to give you a couple of bits of news here. Let me see if I can put this back. I got this in the mail yesterday or the other day. This is Peter O'Donnell's. Let me blow this up real quick. This is Peter O'Donnell's Orotone book, and I went through it a couple of times. You know, after reading this and looking at this is basically what it is. It's a positive albumin, using albumin as a binder and making a positive. I've actually done these before. I haven't gone through the orotone process of golding them or making them, toning them gold. But, and I haven't used these exact recipes. He's got some sugar and syrup albumin, sugar syrup, albumin recipes. Basically, if you've made albumin, you can do this. So that's a great little piece of information. I'm looking forward to jumping on that as well, too. That'll be fun to do. So, having said that, let's go over here and do this whole share screen and get on with our program here. Share. So we're going to do this today. On the second part, remember we're looking at Sutton's book, right? Let's jump over here. We'll go through this real quick. This is the second part of the Collodion Process, Wet and Dry, Thomas Sutton, London, 1862. There's the book right there. And this is method number 2 of making negatives. So we're going to look at that today. I think you guys will find this interesting. I'm going to jump right in it because this is going to be a lot of information to consume, and I don't want to really go over time too much today. So, hey, Paul Smith, good to see you. Couldn't get StreamYard link. Come on, Pablo. Hey, I'll put the StreamYard link up in here. If you guys want to jump in live, let me do that real quick. Let me put that StreamYard link over here. And you can always go to my website. If you don't know, if you're not on social media, whatever, go to studioq.com. You'll see a little link, Studio Q Show. The StreamYard link will be there. I'll paste it up here. So, Pablo, you want to come in here, or anyone? There it is. It's right in the YouTube chat. Hey, Drew and Christina, good to see you. Bucks County, PA. Paul Smith says, hi, Jeffrey. Chris Fry, hello. Good to see everybody. Awesome. Yeah, come on in if you want to. Anybody that wants to come in live, it's always nice. Jeffrey's he's my rock. He's always here. There's Pablo. He's my rock. Jeffrey, come on in if you want to. Anybody that wants to come in live, it's always So good. Thanks for coming in, Pablo. Gracias por todo, amigo. Thank you for everything, friend. So let's get on to and there's Craig Dinsdale. Good to see Craig. You called me the other day. In the technical comments, I'm gonna talk about what you asked about the book. I'll clarify that for you. So good to see you, Craig. So this is Mr. Thomas Sutton. We first saw last week how to make these strange iodizer only negatives. Not really strange. They're wonderful, actually. I can't wait to put that into practice. But this week we're going to look at a method you probably are more familiar with, but we're also going to look at the theory behind that as well, too. So This is method, what I call method number 2. There's 1 last week, 2 this week. This is the bromo-iodized collodion process. This is what most would think of when they talk about making wet collodion negatives. This is what you'll find in my book. This is what you'll find with redevelopment or intensification, and we'll talk about why that is. Notice there wasn't any intensification or redevelopment necessarily with the iodide only, or the method 1, the pyrogallic acid process, method 1, making negatives. So this is the bromo-iodized. Let's go through this real quick. It will be understood from the following brief sketch of this process in what respects it different from that which we just described. And that we did it last week, right? Method number 1. The collodion contains a bromide as well as an iodide. You're very familiar with this, right? Salts and solvents are the iodizers. So you put your bromides, iodides only, whatever you're doing with your alcohol and ether, that's your iodizer. Then you mix it with your plain USP collodion. The plate is cleaned and coated in the usual way, and then excited in a nitrate bath, which is slightly acidified with nitric acid. So there's another difference right there. Last week in method 1, neutral bath, no acidification of the bath. So there's the first difference. You add a bromide. Second difference is you acidify your silver bath. The negative is developed with protosulfate of iron, or we call it ferrous sulfate or iron, right? Versus pyrogallic acid in method 1. That's the third change. It's iron instead of pyrogallic acid. But it is in this first stage too feeble to give a good print. So right off the bat, he says, yeah, go ahead and use this method, but it's way too feeble to make a print, right? So meaning it's too weak, it's not dense enough. We'll go on with this. Although full of detail, that's what he likes. This is what we call a soft negative, maybe. Then follows the second part of the process, which consists of intensifying, or we call it redeveloping, the feeble negative by means of pyrogallonitrate of silver. And we'll talk about that. After which is fixed and finished in the usual way. Negatives taken in this way are generally, now here he goes, are generally gray, silvery looking and silvery looking, that's easy to say, by reflected light. Remember last week we talked about the colors in that particular negative, and these are some of the visual differences. And they are frequently flat and deficient in force of contrast, as well as veiled with a gray veil over the lights. You have all seen your positives on glass look this way. You've seen it. I know if you've made positives long enough, you've seen exactly what he's describing here. Although he's describing the potential negative with gray veil over the lights, which gives them the appearance of ground glass. They are, however, generally remarkable for fullness of detail. This is what he keeps reiterating. This is what he keeps talking about, the detail, the bromides and the details in some of these areas that you can't necessarily get any other way. And comparatively freedom from solarization. And you can get that in the first method as well, too. The process is better suited than the former for working in strong light, taking sun-lighted views, for instance. So we talked about last week, what are these differences in the first iodide-only method 1 making negatives? He talks about glass houses. He talks about the studio light, weak light, those types of environments for that first method. Now he's talking about the second method for strong light, right? Working outdoors. Like this is something I may want to employ up here on the mountain with a lot of UV bright light, but not necessarily if you're overcast or whatever. He talks about both of these methods are good. They're interchangeable, but generally speaking, the second method is good for strong light, sunlighted views. But as a rule, it does not yield bold, spirited prints, but tame, flat ones, or only bold ones as the dose of bromide is diminished and the process rendered more like that with the iodized collodion. So that's what he's talking about. The making negatives are tamed down. The contrast and density is tampered down with the addition of the bromides. That's really important to remember. What then, it may be asked, are the advantages of this process? Right, that's what we're asking, right? And why is it so popular, seeing that it involves an additional operation, which is the redevelopment or intensification, and consumes more time and materials? The answer is that a tolerable result can be got with comparatively bad chemicals. Isn't that a great answer, right? we don't have that problem today. But this guy, you know, we read last week, this guy, this is my new favorite book, by the way. And we're going to continue on next week with albumin making, which just totally blew my mind, making albumin prints. But this guy writes, he's hilarious. He's direct, straightforward. I love his prose, his writing a lot. It's really funny a lot of the times. So with bad chemicals, meaning that is with collodion containing methylated ether and commercial acid silver nitrate. So back in the day, you had to buy this triple blend silver nitrate if you wanted it clean, if you wanted it acid free. And you also had to buy high grade or make yourself high grade collodion because they used the cheapest ether and alcohol they could find. And those would have additives in them. And that's what he's talking about. Methylated, methyl ethyl ketone, methylated alcohol, those kinds of things, which would yield nothing but total failures in the iodized collodion, right? So if you use those bad chemicals in the first method 1, you wouldn't get anything. So this is his workaround or his fix, because most of these guys were making positives along with negatives, or introducing, going from positives and introducing negatives. So this is an easy transition for them. Although there is no economy in using bad chemicals and bromo-iodized collodion, but quite the reverse, because a good deal of silver is used in intensifying. We'll talk about that. Still, the bromide helps people out of difficulty, and they will go on with it without considering that they are really losers in the long run, both in pocket and time. So here he goes again. He's jabbing you tyros. He's jabbing you. He begins the book with, this is a book for tyros, beginners, newbies. We say newbies today. So in 160 years, when we write newbie somewhere, they'll have to look it up and they'll see beginner, or, you know, tyro. It was a 19th century British word for a beginner. So there he goes. It'll help people out of difficulty if they go, and they'll go on with it without considering that they are really losers in the long run, both in the pocket and time. That is one reason why bromized collodion with iron developer and after intensifying is used. Another and much sounder reason is that it yields an extremely even and perfect film, free from spots and defects, and therefore is perhaps well suited to the majority of photographers, same thing today, who are impatient of filtering solutions and taking nice little precautions in their work. So if you're not fastidious, if you're not tidy, if you're not super paying attention to detail, if you're not well organized, if you like to slop around, and sometimes I do. I'm usually pretty good though, but this is the method for you. Then again, the intensifying of the negative proceeds slowly, and this operation is rather more under control in unskillful hands than in the other process. So remember, the method 1, were iodized only collodion, pyrogallic acid for a developer, no redevelopment, no intensification. We're talking about straight up hardcore negatives. We talked about the color range in it. It doesn't have it can solarize, but it doesn't have this flat gray ground glass appearance like these do. Good negatives in wet collodion look terrible as positives. That's just the general rule, and that's kind of what he's saying in that last page there. Some very fine instantaneous stereoscopic views have been taken with bromo-iodized collodion and iron development. So right off the bat now, he's talking about, well, you know what? You can work in these various conditions, and he's going to mention Mr. Wilson and Mr. Blanchard here, Mr. England. Although the prints are frequently somewhat flat and heavy, yet it must be confessed that the negatives are very clean and even, and the details delicate. So there's some positives and negatives there about this second method. Okay, to make the bromo-iodized collodion, this you'll find this very familiar. Again, we don't have this ether added to it. Remember, we talked last time, he made his own ether. We can look at that. We talked about the differences. And Craig called me this week. We'll talk about that in the technical portion, about how much liberty you have here making collodion. But here's the bromo-iodized solution for negatives. Alcohol 1 ounce, 29.5 mils. cadmium iodide, 0.9 grams, and cadmium bromide, 0.65, just a little over a half a gram. So you can kind of see the breakdown there. And then again, add 1 part by measure the solution to 3 parts measured by plain collodion. The collodion thus made will contain an equal number of atoms of iodine and bromine, which is the proportion necessary to ensure the most exalted sensitivity, and in the highest degree, the particular qualities of a negative, which are due to the presence of bromine. And if you've ever made daguerreotypes, or you know how to make daguerreotypes, that's the accelerator. When you fume over a bromine box, that's the accelerator for bromine or for daguerreotypes. And in this case, it gives some very subtle details in some of the midtones, in some of the colors, the greens and yellows and things like that. Outdoors, in particular green colors, you'll see if you don't add the bromide to the collodion, you'll see a different iodide only. So he goes on to say the quality of bromide in this formula is a maximum and must not be exceeded. Here we go. These are really important to pay attention to. Even if you never use this recipe or never do this, keep this in mind, chemically speaking. So the bromide in this formula is a maximum, 0.65 grams in this particular case. You could extrapolate that out to a liter and see where you're at. It's I don't know, 6.5. I'd have to do the math on it. But don't exceed that limit of bromides. Should the film appear too creamy, remember we've talked about this coming out of the silver bath. Should the film appear too creamy, add to it a little more plain collodion and ether, meaning you're going to diminish those salts down a little bit. If it comes out of your silver bath and it's opaque and creamy and you can't see through it, we talked about what happens there. You're eating up your silver bath, you're losing sensitivity because the image is just writing on the surface. It only sensitizes the surface. We talked about that last week. So if you haven't watched it, go back and watch it or listen to it again. This collodion may be mixed in any proportion with iodized collodion in order to obtain different effects, provided the iodized collodion be not iodized with potassium iodide. Check that out. No potassium salts in this. Ki, remember the stuff that throws particulate matter down? You can use this. And in other words, you have a batch of bromo-iodized collodion and a batch of his method 1 iodized collodion, no problem. No problem at all. Mix and match, not a problem. And let's go on and see why. But with the iodide of cadmium or ammonium, I prefer both of those. CDI is cadmium iodide. NH4I is ammonium iodide. I prefer both of those. I like potassium iodide too. It just depends on the purpose of it, the length, the shelf life, et cetera, speed sometimes. But use iodized collodion if you're making negatives in low light. Use that first method, and you'll forget about speed as far as that goes, ISO. The reason is that on mixing bromide, cadmium bromide with potassium iodide, double decomposition occurs. We know what that is, by which cadmium iodide and potassium bromide are formed. Check that out. Those are the byproducts. Remember the 2 byproducts? Let me pull that up, just because you can't reiterate this stuff enough. Here's our normal. We're using cadmium bromide, ammonium iodide in the collodion. Goes into our silver bath, produces silver bromide and silver iodide. But look at those 2 pieces in the middle there: cadmium nitrate and ammonium nitrate. So this is what he's talking about. These 2 salts coming together on a little level there, and it's throwing off 2 by which cadmium iodide and potassium bromide are formed. Those are the 2 byproducts. The latter salt being difficulty soluble in collodion is thrown down or renders the collodion turbid. So there's some good reasons to pay attention. Maximum amount of bromides and mixing these salts together. And again, we're talking about synchronicity. We're talking about that harmonizing of this process. That's why people run into a lot of problems, are these little tiny details that no one ever talks about in this process. Be careful never to put a bromo-iodized plate into the pure neutral silver bath like the first method. for the iodized collodions, else you will lose the fine qualities of that bath and get gray veiled negatives instead of blooming ones. So I love these little tiny tidbits of information. This is where you really start to shine as you get into the weeds and you start to understand the process in making images. These are the little tiny tidbits of information that will really go a long way in your quality of image making. So coat the plate exactly the same way that it was described before in method 1. So here's the silver bath for this method 2. Same thing. It's a 5.7, 57 grams per liter in distilled water. And then to add to every 5 ounces, add about a half a mil of nitric acid for every 5 ounces, depending on how much you make. Excite the plate in the same way as we did before, described leaving it in the bath over the night. So what we talk about, we take a glass plate, clean it, pour good collodion on it, red or orange collodion, something highly iodized, and put it in first make your bath, put it in your bath, let it sit a few hours or eat overnight. I've done both, and it will fill up with iodides, and it won't steal them from your plate when you first make your first image. The exposure, give the same exposure as for pure iodized collodion and neutral bath. So he's saying these are interchangeable. A lot of these things, just go back to method 1. It's the same thing. So your exposure is going to be similar. The development, here's the iron developer. So ferrous sulfate, 65.5 grams. Check that out. So now we can go back to percentages. We're at over 65 grams in 1 liter and 62 mils of acid. That doesn't surprise me. These are negatives, right? To 1 liter. So we've doubled the iron in this. And again, 5.7% silver bath. Again, you got to match this stuff up. It won't work. You take this recipe and that recipe and this and mix them all up. You're not going to, what do we call them? Muddling fools or something last week. I don't know what he called them. And then if you need a little alcohol, would I say 20 mils to a liter? A little alcohol. They say Q.S, quantity sufficient. When would you need alcohol? It's only when your bath gets saturated with solvents and your developer doesn't flow over the plate. Add a little bit of alcohol in your developer. And a little bit is 20 mils. That's 2% to a liter. The above developer is very strong in iron. Yeah, a little bit. And corresponds in strength with the quantity of bromide in the collodion. See that? That's really important. Nobody ever talks about these correlations, your silver bath, your salt level, all that stuff. So there you go. So the developer is very strong, correlates with the strength and quantity of bromide in the collodion because more bromide requires more iron and vice versa. How about that? There's a little tidbit for you. When therefore you mix iodized with bromo-iodized collodion, you must reduce the strength of the developer. Okay? For simply iodized collodion, the iron developer need not be stronger than 5 grains of iron to the ounce. And we're talking about 30 grains here, right? So keep all this in your head. If you run these recipes, and I'll put these into practice eventually, I'll show them to you. I'll show them all to you. If you run these recipes, do not miss these details. Go back and listen or read or go over them again. Hey, there's Oliver from Germany. Good to see you, brother. And Mr. Analog from the UK. Wonderful, wonderful. Right in the middle. Pablo says, first out showed up early today saying he's fixing again after redeveloping with Pyro. I didn't do that. Okay, we'll talk about that. No, you don't have to fix again after redeveloping. He's in the second method. It's a normal procedure of fixing and then redeveloping. But we'll talk about that, Pablo. We can get there. So here you go. So 5 grains to the ounce. Pour the developer very quickly and evenly over the plate, or lines or irregularities will occur. We talked about sweeps and islands and all those things you can get. The picture comes out almost at a blow, boom, quick, and must be watched very closely, and development stopped before the plate is too much veiled. You don't want any veiling on it, though. The image is very thin, silvery, and superficial, as you talked about before. As soon as all the details are out and you have got as much density as you can without fogging the lights, wash the iron solution off thoroughly, pouring from a water jug or faucet upon the film, and leave the plate covered with water on your leveling stand while you mix the intensifying solution. So now we have not fixed the image, Pablo. So we go in right now, he's going in right to the intensifier or redeveloper, we call it. And just real quickly, for those of you that haven't watched these shows before, intensifying, we use what we call intensifying. We use a copper sulfate and ammonium bromide as a bleach. And then we bleach the plate, and then we drop it into a very strong silver nitrate bath, and it intensifies. It builds a silver up real quick. And you can do it any variation. Redevelopment is what we call this today. So just verbiage-wise, it's a little different, but it's the same thing. So to intensify or redevelop the negative, pour into a chemically clean measure as much as is required to cover the plate and the following solutions: 6.5 grams of pyro, 11 grams of citric acid to 1 liter of distilled water. You can break that down and make as much or as little as you want. And the silver that you add to the pyro is 22 grams of Agno 3 to 1 liter. So it's 2.2% silver versus like your 8.8 silver bath or 9% silver bath, your 45 grain silver bath. So there's your redeveloper or intensifier, as he calls it. Make the mixture in a dark room, and as soon as mixed, pour the water off the plate and pour this on. The thin image will now gradually acquire intensity in the blacks. So he's saying right after you've got the plate washed after developer, put it nice and level in a pan of water, mix up a little bit of your pyro redeveloper intensifier, pull it out of the water and pour that right on there. So he's really concerned about the pyro oxidizing and all that kind of stuff. Carry the operation as far as you think right, and then stop it by washing off the redeveloping mixture. This will become black and turbid, but that does not signify you provided you keep it in motion upon the plate. If the iron developer is not thoroughly washed off before the pyrogallic intensifier is poured on, the mixture of the two will produce common writing ink upon the plate. Check that out. Writing ink, like in your fountain pens, that's what it produces. So if you don't wash that iron developer off your plate and you pour pyro on it, you're going to have those two combined will make black writing ink, just FYI. Pyrogallic acid and iron ferrosulfate may, however, be mixed and yield a clear fluid, provided nitric acid also be added in sufficient quantity. So you can restrain that process from happening. He just made a comment, made a point there. And then fix the negative. After you've redeveloped it or intensified it, now you go to your fix. And again, this is a 200-gram solution in 1 sodium thiosulfate in 1 liter of distilled water. And then after which the plate must be well washed, dried, and varnished. Real quick note, a lot of people write me and send me images about they get spots, they get changing colors. Oliver, we talked about this week. Depending on what thiosulfate, ammonium thiosulfate, some turn brown, some turn red, some get black spots, some darken down. If you're using something other than KCN or potassium cyanide to fix images, you run the risk, if you don't keep that fixer fresh and your wash is long and active, meaning running water in 30-40 minutes, you're going to run the risk of that spontaneous, either spots coming up, and they're not pinholes, they're silver iodide that hasn't been mixed with hypothiosulfate or thiosulfate or ammonium thiosulfate that hasn't been washed out of the plate, or the silver product that it produces when your fix is exhausted and you're trying to fix an image in it, it may fix, and then you don't wash it long enough, you're not going to wash those byproducts off, and it's going to go dark, get spots, whatever. Be very cautious of that. I get a lot of those. So if you're not using KCN, I would recommend, and if you're selling plates or if it's an important plate, you switch your fix out every time for each plate. Just switch it out. Or maybe do 2 plates and then switch it out. That maximum. Just FYI. Should the negative be still too feeble, it may be intensified a second time after fixing. So there's a couple of different processes, right? I teach to redevelop after fixing, but obviously you can do it before fixing. It's a lot like toning in your prints. You can tone before you fix or tone after you fix. It's kind of a preference. There are pros and cons. We'll go into that next week when we talk about his albumin printing. So intensifying after fixing. At the 2-3 grain. Okay, so here we go. This is what we really call redevelopment. Maybe the distinguishing part is, if you have my book, you say, wait a minute, he didn't pour any iodine on that plate before he intensified it. Hold on. Well, here we go. Add 2 or 3 crystals of potassium iodide and a grain or 2 of iodine to an ounce of water. He's making iodine here. That's how you make iodine. You can go on YouTube and search. You can make your own iodine. It won't, if you don't use it right away. I've made a lot of it. If you don't use it right away, it goes clear on you. But the exact quantity is unimportant. So mix those together. The iodine will dissolve in the other solution. Pass it through a filter. Wash all of the hypo from the film, and then in daylight, pour it over the above solution, just like I talk about in my book. You have your fixed washed negative, or positive negative here. You pour your iodine on it, your dilute iodine solution on it. That's what he's talking about, daylight. The negative will soon take a tinge of yellow. Ours, I would say, I talk about the silver turning kind of a gray color, a purple color, right? It gets a kind of it does tinge. I don't know if I'd say yellow, but in consequences of the conversion of some of the silver into silver iodide. This is what I call rehalogenation in my book. When you take a glass plate with reduced metallic silver on it, your image on it, your highlights, and you pour iodine on that, you're now creating silver iodide, or some portion. It's very slight, like he talks about, but it is. It's now sensitive to light again. You've created AGI in a way, right? So not in a way, you have created it slightly, I should say. So that's what he's talking about. It takes on a slight consequence of the conversion of some of the silver into silver iodide. Now wash the iodine solution off thoroughly. What I say is you pour it on, I expose it to light a little bit, and then come in and wash it off, right? Thoroughly off the plate in the darkroom and pour over a small quantity, 5-grain solution of silver nitrate, okay? So this will render all the dark parts of the picture highly sensitive to light. Expose it to light. Now he ramps it up. He gets the AGI on there. He pours a weak solution of silver nitrate on it. He ramps it up and primes it for the light. Expose it to light for a second or two. And then in the darkroom, develop or strengthen it a second time by the application of the pyrogallic acid pyrogallic developer or intensifier. So here he goes. Iodine, wash it off, pour a weak solution of silver nitrate on it, expose it to light for a second or two, come back in, pour your pyrogallic redeveloper on it. Boy, you're really going to punch that intensity up on that. Just chemically speaking, I can tell what's going to happen there. And this operation may be repeated as often as you like, just like pyro redevelopment. You can go as much, or I call them cups, 40, 80 mil cups. You can go as much as you want, 5, 10 drops of silver nitrate in there. Go as much or as long as you want. You build it. This is what I like about the pyro redevelopment versus the bleach it with bromide and sulfate and then drop it in a silver bath kind of thing. I like this control you have with pyro redeveloper. It has been affirmed that you may build up the blacks of a negative in this way until they become raised enough for the common surface printing in the printing process. Let me translate that for you. You can go long enough or do this as many times to raise that up to where you get a relief that you can actually put that print inked on something and make a print from it, right? Raised up, relief. You're actually going to physically raise those highlights and midtones up. That's very interesting. But all this intensification renders the details very coarse, of course. I mean, no doubt. Because the action takes place laterally as well as vertically. A really fine negative can scarcely be obtained in this way. So what he's saying, you can go so much, you build up the silver so much, you actually have a physical relief on it, like a matrix in oil printing. But he says you're not going to have good results with that. But if you do it once and see where you're at, you can do it, you can do it as many times as you like, but watch that. Watch where it goes as far as that goes. In the account now given of the process, I have stated the effects produced by a maximum of bromide in the collodion together with nitric acid in the bath. So maximum bromide in your collodion and acidified silver bath. That's what he's talking about there. This will give the most sensitive but very thin silvery film, which is difficult to intensify. By sacrificing a little sensitivity and using less bromide in the collodion and acidic acid in the bath, okay, so he jumped from nitric to acidic, density is more easily obtained, and the negatives are clear in the lights. Interesting. So now he talks about reducing the bromide a little bit, so you're not as sensitive, and substituting the nitric acid for glacial acidic acid. By observing all these nice points, the reader will be able to vary the process according to his own taste. It's so true. This is all experimental. These are the general guidelines. These are what to do, not to do. But you get in your studio, your dark room, and you experiment. When the bath is acidified with acidic instead of nitric acid, the first development with iron may be pushed further. So there's more restraining action and greater density obtained without fogging the plate. Very, very interesting. This next part is very interesting. By using protoacetate instead of protosulfate of iron, so iron acetate instead of ferrous sulfate, the development more clearly resembles that which pyrogallic acid, and no after intensification is required. So if you want to get some iron acetate, substitute that out. You can do that in this second method. And then this is strange. The protoacetate of iron is made by adding sugar of lead to a solution of ferrous sulfate. So lead acetate is added to ferrous sulfate, or sugar of lead is lead acetate. So you start getting into these other really hard-hitting, intensifying redeveloping chemicals. I would stick with pyrogallic acid, and describe some of his methodology might be just perfect. I will show you all of these. I will once I get my darkroom, I'm coming back to this book, Van Machthoven's book, Esther Brooks' book, and I'll show you these in real life examples. The acidic acid goes to the iron and the sulfuric acid to the lead, forming insoluble sulfate of lead sulfate, which is filtered out. Acidic acid is then added to the clear liquid and it's ready for use. Another developer, which brings out the image with great rapidity or very fast, is made by adding lead acetate, sugar of lead, to a saturated solution of gallic acid. The mixture produces a white turbid solution of gallate of acid, which is to be at once poured upon the plate. So it's very fast oxidizing. You can tell that by what he's using there. Some persons intensify a negative after fixing by means of bichloride of mercury and potassium iodide. So he goes on to here. They used some really dangerous chemicals back in the day, and they had no protective gear and all that stuff. So we're going to stay away from the mercury and all these other chemicals. Let's stick with that. Let's jump over to page 66. Go to varnish. Some kinds of varnish lower the tone of the negative. The spirit varnish made by Mr. Bailey, and we talked about that. This is, by the way, let me show you this real quick. This is what I use. This is a super blonde de-wax shellac. I'm getting ready to get my darkroom up, and I'm going to make some of this. But this is really good stuff. This is what he uses in his spirit varnish. Let's see. Just FYI. The spirit varnish made by Mr. Bailey or Mr. Jacobson or anybody and advertised at the end of the work has no such effect. So what he's talking about there, and you hear this with people, right? Oh, I use gum Sanderac and it darkens, mostly positives. It darkened my image down so much. There is an element. You can spin the color out of the gum Sanderac if you want, but typically if you made if you haven't added too much resin to your alcohol, your positive image in this case should look exactly the way it looked when it was wet is when it's varnished, just FYI. But this, if you want to get away from that, go to a blonde, or what they call here a super blonde de-waxed shellac, and you won't have any color shift. I mean, and there's all kinds of varnishes you can use out there. Modern varnishes have no color to them, right? The name escapes me right now, but the modern varnishes that smell terrible are perfectly clear and work very well if you have time to dry them. So here, let's just go over the theory of bromo-iodized collodion real quick. The effects of using bromide and collodion have been studied by me very carefully during the past year, and the results of my experiments have been highly interesting. It was natural to expect from the great accelerating influence of bromine in the daguerreotype process, right? Remember I told you you fume the plate over iodine and bromine, bromine. That's the speed up, the quick stuff. That something of the same kind would occur in the collodion process. But that expectation has only been realized in the dry processes. That's very interesting. For it turns out that wet iodized collodion with free nitrate of silver upon the plate is quite sensitive as wet bromo-iodized collodion, unless the latter is brought to such a state to yield impractical thin negatives. You just can't, they're not practical to use. What he's talking about there is the iodized collodion without bromine or bromides is just as fast as the bromo-iodized collodion, wet collodion and wet iodized collodion. Bromide and silver chloride differ from silver iodide in this important respect, that they can be reduced by the continued action of light to a dark colored mass, even without the presence of free nitrate. So you know that, right? You know that silver chloride on a print, you leave it in the light long enough, it'll go dark, right? While silver iodide in its pure state is perfectly insensitive light. You have a jar, you have your glass bottle of AgNO3, and perfectly fine if there's no organic material in there, and silver iodide as well too. So far as any change produced in which can be tested by the action of any known developing agent. Thus, silver bromide, which is a yellowish-white insoluble substance, turns deep blue when exposed to light. And silver chloride, which is a white insoluble substance, turns gray when exposed, while silver iodide undergoes no visible change whatever. That's very interesting, chemically speaking. So he goes on to say, thus, although simply bromized collodion film is very insensitive and only yields a good camera image after a very long exposure, yet in a state of mixture of combination with silver iodide, it forms, even without free nitrate, a highly sensitive film. A similar effect occurs, though in less degree, with chloride, lactate, citrate, acetate, and other sensitive silver salts. So he's giving you the basics of what light affects these halogens and what how the halogens respond, basically. Another curious fact connected with the silver bromide is that when bromo-iodized wet film is developed with pyrogallic acid, a longer exposure is required in order to bring out the details than with simply iodized film. So a longer, that's why he mentions it's good in bright sun, et cetera, right? But when ferrous sulfate is used in sufficiently strong dose, a longer exposure is not required. There's your 65.5 grams per liter, right? For the sensitivity is the same that as a good iodized collodion. So he's making references, the differences of these two collodions and silver baths and developers and light and the relationship to all of this stuff. It appears that the presence of organic salts of silver, such as acetate in a silver nitrate bath, interfere with the sensitivity of the film when bromide is present, and that an organic developer has not the same power to bring out all the latent details as an inorganic developer. That's the difference. He's saying that acetate is blocking that ability to do that. Hence, the proprietary of acidifying the silver nitrate bath with nitric acid instead of acetic acid for nitric acid will decompose all the organic silver salts in the bath. There's another little good tidbit right there. Why do we add nitric acid versus acetic acid, and why would we? There today, you learn 2 reasons why or why not to do that. The iron developer, it will also be observed, is used much stronger proportions than the pyrogallic developer, and it seems to throw down the metallic silver, which constitutes the image, in larger crystals, therefore producing a gray silvery appearance and a deposit, which is difficult to intensify. So there's your difference. It doesn't really, I always say pyro stains and silver builds up, and look at the size of the crystals it throws down the metallic silver, which constitutes the image in larger crystals, thereby producing a gray silvery appearance. That's why it's gray, right? And difficult to intensify. Beyond noting these curious facts, nothing more can be said at present on this interesting subject. In other respects, the theory of the bromo-iodized is the same as that of the iodized collodion process. The accelerating effect of bromine in the dry process is very remarkable, as will be shown in the following chapter. We're not going to do dry stuff, but that's very, those little details all throughout that whole process. I've done so many negatives just like this, but without those small details. It's very, very interesting to read. He spent a year just messing around with this one topic of bromo-iodized collodion. So I'll throw him the kudos on that one. Liquitex, thank you, Jeffrey. Liquitex, that's the modern varnish. It's clear. It smells terrible, but it's clear. So technical questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. But we're going to jump here. Nolan from South Africa. I talk to him quite often. Seems like a great guy. He wrote me last week and talked. Said, "Hey, have you ever done anything on Petzval lenses?" And let me describe what a Petzval lens is real quick. Josef Petzval was a Hungarian mathematician, and he designed this style, a convex-concave 2 lens systems that sped up, that allowed so much light to come in the optic that the exposures of the daguerreotypes went from 20 minutes to 2 minutes or 20 seconds, or really 10 times, 100-fold more speed. So a Petzval lens is just like that. It's usually a big piece of glass, very fast, f3 to f4, f4.5. There's Petzvals in that range. The fastest one's 2.8. I have a DeRozier that I calculated just under f3. But they have big pieces of glass in them, convex and concave in the front, convex, concave in the back, air gapped and glued. One set, the other set not. But they were ground by hand, and they have one little sweet spot. That's what we call the sweet spot in the center of the optic. You get outside of that and you start getting swirls and woo, you're going round and round. So what Nolan's asking here is, he said, is there any tricks on how to take a portrait and not have the eyes dead bang in the center of the plate, where your sweet spot is, right? So yes, and then he sent this image along about what I did here, and this was made with my DeRozier, that f2.8, and I focused on his forward eye, but I also people ask me, or used to ask me, not so much anymore, but used to ask me, Quinn, why don't you use an authentic 1870 Anthony tailboard camera? And usually I say, because it has no movements, and I love Petzval lenses, and I need to move that lens around. So rise and fall, swing, tilt, back. I love the Chamonix. I've used the Chamonix for years and years and years now. And on my 10 by 10 cameras, my ultra large format camera had all the movements I need. So the swing, the rise and fall, the tilt, all of that. If you understand how to use those, and I put these links in the on the comments. I'll put them in the private. I think I put them in the private. No, I'll put them in the private chat. Sorry, we haven't had the private chat when I did that. So the answer real quickly is yes. He asked right there, would you have the camera slightly? I assume a few movements are involved. Yes. Number one, you need a large format camera that has the movements, right? These old fixed cameras didn't have maybe some of this, but they never had anything that you could really get your arms around to really move that sweet spot wherever you want. So that's what I do. I created this. This is what I call a 3/4 head and shoulders. It's cropped just a little bit, but I raised the camera up, tilted it down a little bit, left the bed there, and I was able to put that sweet spot right there on his eye and still not having dead center of the frame, right? This is a whole plate. So his eye would be, the sweet spot, if I just left it, would be kind of like on his nose or maybe in his mouth area. So I rose it up and brought it forward to his forward eye and focused it. That's what you need to do. If you don't understand view cameras or large format cameras, you should learn about them and learn how these movements work. I just gave you, I'll post the links in the private chat, like I said, but I posted links in the YouTube chat earlier of a couple of good, there's a YouTube video that kind of describes it, and then some basics on view camera movements. But that's how you do. If you like to use rapid rectilinear lenses, landscape lenses, sharp edge to edge, you got your bellows tiny, you want the whole scene nice and sharp, you're stopped down to f16 or 22 or 32. I mean, you can still use your movements, of course, if you want to enlarge something or include something or have your parallels or whatever you want to do. But this is more petzful, moving that sweet spot around on your lens. So really important. If you don't understand the view camera stuff and movements, learn them. They're invaluable. It will make a huge difference in your images. So I hope that helped, Nolan. You can let me know. I'm sure he'll talk to me. Oh, here we go. So I did put the lenses or the links up for Martin Hessen. He's a British dude. He does pretty good. He just shows you some of the movements and talks. It's real basic. And then Fred, this guy, the link there. Oh, Fred Newman. He's got some. I was going to get the PDF, but you can't download it. Let me grab this link and I'll put it in the private chat. But you can talk to. I'll give you this link before we leave. You can watch any YouTube videos about movement. Just keep them basic. They'll show you what they do. It does, how it enlarges things in the foreground, how you can use if you have tilt or swing on the back or the front standard, how they vary and how you can enlarge things, your parallel lines if you're doing buildings. It's really important to know this stuff. So if you don't know it, spend a little time on it. Remind me so I can put those links. So here we go. This is Oliver. He's in the chat there. So exactly, I wrote you back, Oliver, and that's exactly what I said earlier. But he says, I don't know what it is, but sometimes I have the feeling some of the plates are getting darker with time, between a half and a full stop. Which that is, even a half a stop is significant. So if it's occurring in a few months, you know what it's going to look like in a few years, right? It's not going to be there. So it's really important, again, I'll reiterate this. If you're using sodium thiosulfate, ammonium thiosulfate, anything other than KCN, make sure your washing times are long and active, what I say, extended running washing water, and make sure you switch that solution out often. And if you're selling plates or if it's an important image that you want to keep, it's cheap. That fix is cheap. Don't spare it. Use one bath and fix the plate and then wash it for 30 or 40 minutes in running water. Oh, that's an interesting question, Steve. Is it possible to add color to a varnish? I think it is. I don't know how well that would look or how good that would look on a plate. I have never done it, but I think you probably could. It depends on how. Varnish is a resin, usually a tree resin, or lac. Shellac is from a bug, excrement from a bug, and depending on how resistant that is or how it consumes or combines with that would be a little bit of a question. But I said earlier, or not earlier, in the last show and earlier shows, that what I'm doing is I'm combining some of this red soil here where I live with my ink to do oil prints, and that works really well, the pigment from that. So interesting question. You can color, collodion in different tones and things like that. Paper, sorry, albumin paper, you can get colored prints like that. But I'm normally not a big fan on colored images. I'm not a big fan on the rosy cheek and the green tie stuff. Not a big fan of that. But, hey, that's the way it goes. Dale jumped in here. To Oliver's question, any merit to using hypoclear? Yeah, that was the second thing. That does, and people have asked me that quite often. Why don't we just, like in traditional film photography, use something that helps pull that out? So you can throw a pinch of salt when you're doing your prints to help that. Yes, you can use hypoclear. Again, I'm not a big fan on another product or another piece of equipment because we have so many of them now. But if it's going to save your plates and you can't wash your plates long enough, or you can't switch out your hypo frequently enough, that's probably a pretty good solution. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a good point. Oh, good. Oh, here, Jeffrey posted a link on some Petsful, some history of the Petsful, and thanks for that, Jeffrey. I'll post it up there on YouTube. Petsful portrait lenses, aspenimages.com. Cool. So yeah, so good questions. I appreciate those questions coming in. I hope that helped, Oliver. So next week, boy, if you've done any albumin, we're going to start getting into some printing. Make the negatives now. If you've done any albumin printing, this is going to blow your mind. You've never seen. There's about 3 things in here that are just like, wow, I have never heard nor read anything like this before. So next week, we're going to look at Sutton's method of doing albumin, making albumin from the actual albumin, the prints, how to sensitize them, all that. Very different. It's very different. It'll blow your mind. So hopefully you can join us then. So here we go. Recommended reading. If you have not read Jeffrey Batchen, please get Jeffrey Batchen's book. Each Wild Idea, or every wild, I think it's Each Wild Idea, one of my favorite books. Again, he talks about proto-photographers in it. Really good writer on photography. This is another great book, Burning with Desire. And I love this. And here's where he gets the title. In 1828, a letter to his partner, Niepce, Louis Daguerre wrote, "I am burning with desire to see your experiments from nature." I love that. Burning with desire. So in this book, Jeffrey Batchen analyzes the desires to photograph. And I love this concept, the desire to photograph. And I was going to get it. It's pretty dense, so I'm not going to do this, but I thought about it, putting this in. I debated about it for a couple of days. But this desire to photograph has been around a very, very long time. And very philosophical, very interesting. But he goes on to say, recent accounts of photography's identity tend to divide between the postmodern view that all identity is determined by context and a formalist effort to define the fundamental characteristics of photography as a medium. Batchen critiques both approaches by way of a detailed discussion of photography's conception in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. He examines the output of the various nominees for the first photographer, then incorporates this information into a mode of historical criticism informed by the work of Foucault and Derrida. The result is a way of thinking about photography that persuasively accords with the medium's undeniable conceptual, political, and historical complexity. Very good book. If you like the philosophy, photography, and the history of photography, Batchen's your guy. Eggs are meant to be beaten. Stay with salt. I guess Dale's the salt printer of the group. Albumin printing was what finally got me motivated enough to dive into it. Oh, good. I look forward to Chad. You will like this. Oh, you're very welcome, Chad. I appreciate the kind words. Very much so. I'm happy to share. You will like next week. I'm so excited to try some of these methods out, because you know what they produced, right? They know exactly the quality of prints they produced in the 19th century. These are some keys of getting to that quality. So yes, Chad, join us next week for sure. That'll be excellent. So let's jump over to, there's recommended reading. Jeffrey Batchen, one of my favorite writers for sure. Recommended watching. So you guys know this. I've talked a lot about this on this show. Philosophically speaking, we've been doing all technical lately, but philosophically speaking, about being able to talk about your work, being able to write statements, give context and intention to your work, all of those things. So this is again Eileen Rafferty. We looked at a video from her last week on the movements in photography over time. We looked at some of the pictorialists and introduction to pictorialism. But the B&H, the event space at B&H, they have some good videos. You should look them up if you haven't seen those. But as photographers, we love looking at photographs. Quite often, we instinctively know what we like and don't like about an image, right? You either like it or you don't like it, kind of thing. And sometimes you might be in the middle a little bit, but most of the time it's black and white, some little gray areas. But can we articulate this in words? Why is this important? Understanding and speaking the language of the photograph is an essential skill as a photographer. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And now if you are involved in Wet Collodion, now you've got a whole nother layer. You've got a whole nother reason to be involved in the philosophy, the history, the engagement with all of those elements in photography, not just pouring plates and slapping stuff out, but having a full context of what you're doing. It is important to effectively talk about our images. Sorry, my phone's going off. About our images, as well as give feedback to our peers. This is what I try to encourage people to do. Learn the language of photography. And it's a skill. It's not, you just don't naturally have it. You have to learn how to do this. So you can help your peers. So you can help other photographers, other artists. So you can give them good feedback. Not good constructive feedback, not just criticism on the quote unquote the mean stuff. I hate that shit, whatever. No, give them constructive stuff, right? So they can improve. And we all want this. In this video, Eileen Rafferty introduces the language of the photograph and discuss the important elements to address in constructive photographic critique. We'll practice talking about photographs and come away with skills to appreciate the image. I want to play just a couple of minutes of this for you. Let's do that.
Let's get started. Really, we're learning the parts of the photograph, the language about talking about photographs in order to give feedback to other people about their photographs, but then also in order to be able to talk about our own. And so, I've been a teacher for a very long time. I've interacted with a lot of students, and there might be some of you even sitting here in the room thinking this, right? And I would agree that we are visual people and that our images, it's important if our images can say a lot, but we also live in a world of language. We live in a world where we talk to each other. And there's going to be some time in your life as a photographer where you're going to either have to talk about your own work, write about your own work, write an artist statement, write a proposal, or someone goes, what kind of photography do you do? Or why do you do photography, right? So I agree that we are visual people and our images being strong and speaking for themselves is a great thing, but I also think that we need to understand how to talk about photographs as well. So some initial thoughts about critiques that I think are kind of important to just set the guidelines here is, first of all, they are subjective, right? They come from each of our own history and perspective and opinions. And whether you are the person giving the feedback or getting the feedback, it's always important to remember this, right? But we're going to talk about in the lecture how to make it a little more objective, how to make it constructive feedback, right? Because I think that's a really important thing. I think when you're talking about photographs to other people and giving feedback, it's really important to go beyond whether you like or dislike the image. You're always going to have that immediate reaction of liking or disliking an image. But imagine as a teacher who's been teaching for over 15 years with thousands and thousands of students, you can't imagine that I would like every single image that I've critiqued in my life, right? But it's my job to help that person, to give them constructive feedback and to help guide them into why I personally think perhaps that the image could be better, why or how. Okay, so it has to go beyond whether we just like or dislike the image. It's important, and I see this a lot, it's important to address the photograph that's in front of us, right? How often have you been in a situation where someone critiquing images starts going off into some other photograph, what it should have been, could have been, might have been, or what they would have done with the photograph, right? I mean, maybe there's a time and place for that, but it's really important to just talk about the photograph that's right in front of you. That's the image we're talking about. Is there any other information that can help? Meaning, is there a title to the image, right? Is there an artist statement or a statement of intent that goes with it? Is there a caption? Because we all know when there's captions or titles, it can really change the context of the image. So when we're critiquing images, it's important to know if there's any other elements that go along with it that can help tell the story. And then that really gets back to, can we get to the intention of the photograph? Now, we can't always do this. The only way, perhaps, that we can know what the intention was from the photographer is if the photographer is there and we can talk to them, which is a great thing. Or if there is something written about it, like a statement, or if you go in a gallery and there's something written, so you can get some context. And we'll look at some examples during the lecture of how the context of an image can change the way we might look at it.
So I just wanted to share that. I'll post the whole video. I put it in the private chat here. I didn't post it. Let me copy that link address. I'll put it over. If you like that, there it is in Eileen. She's good. Eileen's video critique. You should watch it. If you haven't seen that, you should watch it and learn something, because there's always something we can learn in these things, right? I mean, always. Sorry. So anyway, that's what we have. That's what we did this week. Method 2 of making negatives. Hey, Jan, good to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. Usually, good to see you. Usually what we have happen over the years, I talk about this quite often, there'll be a big rise of wet collodion photographers. You'll see them here for a little while, maybe a few months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. And then all of a sudden, hey, where's Sally? Where's Timmy? Where's Joey? And they're gone. They just, and it is kind of a phase. People go through a phase. A lot of people go through a phase in wet collodion. Some don't. There have been some hardcore people that have hung around. The 20 years I've been at it, I still know a couple of folks that are still at it. So it's not true for everyone, but some folks come in, do a little stint, and then they're out. So it's good to see you, Jan. I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm just saying it does happen. So next week, we're going to talk about albumin printing out of Sutton's book. If you get a chance and you have a studio, grab his book from Google Books and download that, translate all the weights and measurements, and try a negative. Try one of his, try his methods out. I will show you that. The status on my darkroom is this. The building's up, the doors are on, I've got the floor epoxied. We're going to start emptying out our storage unit here. I got a container. All my darkroom stuff is going to start going into my darkroom this week. So we are getting close, and I am super excited. And what I'll probably do, in all honesty, because my studio's, I don't know, 100 meters away or so, 80 meters away, I'll probably film with my GoPro and then come on the show and show you what I've done and that kind of thing. So, that's a good question. If there's any interest on dry collodion negative making, absolutely. If we want to do a session on that, I would. Sutton's got this rapid dry collodion process that's very interesting. Yes, that would be great. Hey, thanks, Steve. Steve likes dry plate. Yeah, we can do that. I'll figure that in. Maybe we'll do it the following week. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. You have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, whatever it is. Dry plate it is. Collodion dry plate. This is called the collodion process, wet and dry. So we can look at that. But enjoy yourself. Stay happy. Stay healthy. And we'll see you next Saturday, I hope. Ciao. Bye-bye.